We're continuing on it in our study in the book of Ephesians and looking at how Paul is saying the Lord is calling us to something more profound than simply the pursuit of our own wealth or own happiness, but calling us to be reconciled to Him, but also reconciled to each other, to be the family of God. Now, when I worked with college students, one of the questions that I would get a lot would be, how do I know what God wants me to do? Should I be a butcher, a baker, a candlestick maker? Of course, they weren't asking those specific professions. They were talking about being an engineer or a lawyer. Should I go into academia? What should I do? And what we see in this passage as we are answering the call of God, that the call of God is not fundamentally about what we should do, but about who we should be. Let me read Ephesians chapter 4, beginning in verse 1. As a prisoner of the Lord, then, I urge you to live a life worthy of the calling you have received. Be completely humble and gentle. Be patient, bearing with one another in love. Make every effort to keep the unity of the Spirit through the bond of peace. There is one body and one Spirit, just as you were called to one hope when you were called, one Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father of all, who is over all and in all. I want to tell you something about myself, which maybe you haven't heard before. Sometimes my friends don't like me to talk about this, but a number of years ago, when I was working in campus ministry, I got fired. I was fired by the local committee overseeing my work. Again, when I bring this up, my friends are like, why are you talking about this? It's going to bring up all kinds of questions about your background, your past, your conduct. Were you impossible to work with? Were you incompetent? Were there serious moral issues involved? Now, I will say this, that there was no moral failing, and the details are really kind of irrelevant, but it just had to do with how should we do the ministry, what was the fundamental perspective and philosophy of getting it done, and there was a disagreement, and I couldn't work it through with my supervisors. And so we parted ways. Now, my friends encouraged me, hey, you have nothing to be ashamed of what happened here. But man, it is hard being fired. And yet it resulted in something very positive for me. A very, maybe rich is not the right word, but profound experience. And to be honest, I think every man should be fired once in his life. Now, why do I say that? It's not that I want bad things to happen to other guys, but being fired strips you of your pride. It empties you out. This gets us to Paul. Paul, he was a man commissioned personally by Christ with the authority of the Spirit of God, and he identifies himself not as an apostle, but as a prisoner. He's under house arrest right now. He's a man emptied out of his pride. And this man urges us to empty ourselves out. That's what humility is, emptying yourself out. And that becomes the source of credibility in gospel ministry, that the gospel has emptied us out and transformed us into humble people. Being a prisoner for the Lord, being thrown in jail, getting fired. It looks really bad on the resume and frightening for anyone following Paul's teaching. Is that what's in store for us? Now, I don't know exactly what the Lord has entailed for you, but my guess is that if you're listening to this at some point in your life, you've been emptied out, and it was not pleasant. It was not fun. And in those moments, unless we know that God is for us and that He can fill us with His love and His grace and His mercy, and then we can live out of that store instead of the store of our own pride and accomplishment, It's miserable. But we can turn to Christ and have him fill us. And in the process, not only do we become people of strength and wisdom, we become humble and loving and understanding. What is God calling you to? He's calling you to humility. And only by his grace can we see that fleshed out in our lives. Remember the calling of God, not only to something, but the fact that he is making you into someone. It's not about what you do fundamentally, but who you are. And by God's grace, you can be a righteous person. Do you believe it? Blessings on you all.